The year is 1947. A massive military operation called Operation High Jump deploys over 4,700 personnel, 13 ships, and 33 aircraft to Antarctica. Officially, it's a research expedition, but something happens during that mission that remains classified to this day. Ships return earlier than planned. Reports get buried. Personnel are sworn to secrecy. And the world moves on, never asking the real question. What were they really looking for in the most desolate place on Earth? But here's what makes this story even stranger. Antarctica is the only continent on this planet with absolutely no native human history. Zero. While every other landmass on Earth has archaeological evidence of human habitation going back thousands or even tens of thousands of years, Antarctica stands completely empty. And if you're finding this mystery as fascinating as I am, make sure to subscribe and hit that like button because this investigation goes deeper than you could ever imagine, and sharing this video might just wake up others to questions they never thought to ask. Now, most people hear this and immediately think they have the answer. Obviously, it's too cold, right? Obviously, the ice makes it impossible for humans to live there. But that explanation falls apart the moment you examine the facts. The Inuit people survived in the Arctic for over 4,000 years in conditions just as harsh. The Nenets of Siberia have lived in frozen tundra for millennia. Humans have proven time and again that extreme cold is not a barrier to survival. We adapt, we endure. We find ways to thrive in the most hostile environments imaginable. So why not Antarctica? Why is this one continent different? The answer isn't in the ice. It's in something far more disturbing. Let me take you back 60 million years. Antarctica wasn't always the frozen wasteland we know today. During the Paleocene and Eocene epochs, this continent was covered in temperate rainforests. Palm trees grew on its coasts. The average temperature was around 50 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Dinosaurs had walked these lands before that, and after their extinction, mammals flourished here. Marsupials roamed through lush vegetation. The continent was connected to South America and Australia through land bridges. Life was abundant. The climate was survivable, even comfortable. And yet, even during these warm periods, even when conditions were perfect for human habitation, no evidence of human presence has ever been found. Not a single tool, not a single campfire, not a single bone fragment that would indicate humans ever set foot on this continent before the modern era. This is where the mystery truly begins. Think about what this means for a moment. Humans have been found in the most unlikely places on Earth. We've discovered evidence of prehistoric humans in the Sahara Desert when it was even more inhospitable than it is today. We found settlements in the highest mountain ranges and the densest jungles on tiny islands thousands of miles from any mainland. Humanity has this incredible drive to explore, to push boundaries, to see what's beyond the next horizon. It's in our DNA. It's what makes us human. And yet there's this massive continent larger than Europe, larger than Australia, and for the entirety of human history before the 1800s, we stayed away. Not because we didn't know it was there, not because we couldn't reach it, but because something kept us away. The archaeological record shows that humans reached the southern tip of South America at least 13,000 years ago, possibly much earlier. From Tierra del Fuego on a clear day, you can almost sense the presence of land further south. Ancient peoples were incredible navigators. They read the stars, the currents, the flight patterns of birds. They would have known something was there. The Polynesians navigated thousands of miles of open ocean using nothing. But their knowledge of nature, settling islands that were barely visible specks in an endless sea. Yet no Polynesian legend speaks of voyages to the great southern land. No South American indigenous culture has oral histories of expeditions to Antarctica. It's as if there was an unspoken agreement among all ancient peoples, a collective understanding that this place was off limits. The fossil record tells us that Antarctica separated from the supercontinent Gondwana around 34 million years ago. The Drake Passage, the body of water between South America and Antarctica, formed around 41 million years ago. But there have been periods since then when sea levels were significantly lower, when ice bridges would have made the crossing easier, when the climate was warmer and more hospitable. During the last interglacial period, around 130,000 to 115,000 years ago, Antarctica's temperature was several degrees warmer than today. Parts of the coastal regions would have been ice-free. This was during a time when modern humans were already spreading across Africa and beginning to migrate to other continents. Yet no one made the journey south. In 1513, a Turkish admiral named Piri Reis created a map that would baffle historians for centuries. The Piri Reis map shows the coastline of Antarctica with remarkable accuracy, depicting features that wouldn't be officially discovered until the 20th century. But here's the problem. Antarctica wasn't officially discovered until 1820. How could a map made 307 years before its discovery show its coastline? And even more disturbing, the map shows the coastline as it would appear without ice. The mountains, the valleys, the bays, all drawn with precision that suggests whoever created the original source maps had seen Antarctica when it was ice-free. Piri Reis himself wrote notes on the map claiming he had compiled it from about 20 older source maps, some dating back to the time of Alexander the Great in the 4th century BC. When researchers at the United States Hydrographic Office analyzed the Piri Reis map in 1960, they were stunned. The map showed geographic features of the Queen Maud Land coast beneath the ice sheet, features that weren't verified until 1949 using modern seismic equipment. Captain Lorenzo Burrows, who participated in the analysis, stated that the map indicated the coastline had been mapped before it was covered by ice. The ancient map makers had somehow accessed information about Antarctica from a time period that predated the last ice age, or at least from a time when the ice coverage was significantly less. But if ancient civilizations knew about Antarctica, if they had mapped it, why didn't they settle there? Why didn't they establish trade routes or colonies? What kept them away? The Piri Reis map isn't alone. The Oronteus Phineus map of 1531 also shows Antarctica, again with details that shouldn't have been known at that time. The Philippe Boische map of 1737 shows Antarctica as two separate landmasses divided by a waterway, which is exactly what modern ice-penetrating radar has revealed exists beneath the ice sheet. These cartographers weren't making lucky guesses. They were working from source material that contained accurate geographic information about a continent that was supposedly unknown to civilization. The question becomes, who created those source maps? Who had the technology and motivation to survey Antarctica in such detail? And most importantly, what happened to them? Some researchers have suggested that these maps are evidence of an advanced prehistoric civilization that existed before the last ice age, a civilization that had the capability to conduct sophisticated geographic surveys and create accurate maps. If such a civilization existed, and if they had the technology to map Antarctica, they certainly had the ability to establish settlements there. But they didn't. Or if they did, they abandoned them so completely that no trace remains. This suggests that whatever they discovered about Antarctica convinced them that permanent habitation was impossible or undesirable. They mapped it, they studied it, and then they left, carrying with them knowledge that eventually filtered down through the ages, showing up in medieval maps that cartographers copied without understanding their true origin. There's another possibility that's even more intriguing. What if these maps weren't created by a lost human civilization at all? What if they're evidence of something else, some other intelligence that surveyed Earth long ago and left behind geographic information that early humans discovered and preserved? This might sound like wild speculation, but when you consider the precision of these maps, when you think about the level of technology required to create them, and when you remember that they show Antarctica as it existed thousands or even millions of years ago, you have to at least consider all possibilities. And if some non-human intelligence mapped Antarctica and left that information for humans to find, the question becomes, why? Were they warning us? Were they marking the continent as forbidden territory? Or were they simply recording what they found before they too abandoned it? Deep beneath the ice of Antarctica lies something that scientists still struggle to explain. The continent sits atop one of the most powerful geomagnetic anomalies on Earth. The South Magnetic Pole, which is different from the geographic South Pole, wanders across the Antarctic continent in patterns that defy simple explanation. But that's just the beginning. In 2006, scientists discovered a massive gravitational anomaly in the Wilkes Land region of Antarctica. The anomaly, which stretches for over 300 kilometers, is so large that it affects the gravitational field of the entire region. Initial studies suggested it might be the remains of a massive asteroid impact, potentially larger than the one that killed the dinosaurs. But subsequent research revealed something even stranger. The gravitational readings don't match any known geological formation. The density patterns are wrong. The magnetic signatures are unusual. Some researchers have proposed that the anomaly could be caused by a massive concentration of dense material deep beneath the ice, but no one can explain what that material might be or how it got there. The structure of the anomaly suggests it's not a simple crater filled with melted rock like other impact sites. Instead, it shows patterns of organization, almost as if something beneath the ice has a deliberate structure. Scientists are careful not to speculate too wildly in official publications, but privately, some admit that the Wilkes Land anomaly is one of the most puzzling geological mysteries on the planet. What makes this relevant to our mystery is the effect such anomalies have on human biology and consciousness. Studies have shown that strong magnetic fields can affect human navigation, mood, cognitive function, and even perception. The human brain is an electrical organ, and its function can be influenced by external electromagnetic fields. Research has demonstrated that exposure to certain magnetic field patterns can cause feelings of unease, confusion, or even fear in test subjects. These effects are usually subtle, but they're measurable and reproducible. Now imagine ancient peoples, who were likely more attuned to natural phenomena than modern humans, encountering an area where the Earth's magnetic field behaved abnormally. They wouldn't have understood what they were feeling in scientific terms, but they would have recognized that something was deeply wrong about the place. Indigenous cultures around the world have legends about certain places being forbidden or cursed, places where the spirits are angry or where the natural order is disrupted. The Aboriginal people of Australia, whose ancestors would have been closest to Antarctica when it was still accessible via land bridges during lower sea level periods, have stories about a great land to the south that was abandoned because it angered the gods. The Maori of New Zealand speak of a frozen land where the souls of the dead wander and living people cannot survive. These stories might be dismissed as mythology, but what if they're ancestral memories of something real? What if early humans encountered something in Antarctica that their descendants remembered as supernatural, but was actually tied to these geomagnetic anomalies? Modern research has shown that animals use Earth's magnetic field for navigation during migration. Birds, sea turtles, salmon, and even some mammals have magnetoreception capabilities, specialized cells that can detect magnetic fields and use them for orientation at early. Humans almost certainly had stronger versions of these senses than we do today. Before we had GPS and compasses and maps, we relied on our innate ability to sense direction and location. If Antarctica's magnetic field was significantly different from the rest of the planet, if it created a sense of disorientation or wrongness that humans could feel but not explain, it would have been enough to create lasting cultural taboos. The feeling wouldn't be conscious or rational. It would be instinctive, visceral, a warning from the deepest parts of the brain that this place is dangerous, this place is not for us. Over time, as human populations grew and cultures developed, these instinctive warnings would have been codified into stories, legends, and taboos. Parents would tell children about the forbidden land to the south. Shamans and spiritual leaders would warn against journeys in that direction. The original reason, the geomagnetic anomaly that caused physical and psychological discomfort, would be forgotten or transformed into supernatural explanations. But the taboo would remain, passed down through countless generations, becoming so deeply ingrained in human culture that even when we developed the technology to reach Antarctica safely, even when we could explain away the supernatural elements, we still felt that lingering unease about settling there permanently. Let's return to Operation High Jump, because the official story has never made sense. In late 1946, Rear Admiral Richard Byrd led the largest Antarctic expedition in history. The official purpose was to establish research bases, test military equipment in cold weather conditions, and assert American presence in the region. But the scale of the operation was massive, far beyond what would be necessary for simple research. 13 ships, including an aircraft carrier, the USS Philippine Sea, submarines, destroyers, and icebreakers. Over 4,700 personnel, including scientists, military officers, and support staff. Enough supplies for an 8-month mission. 29 aircraft, including seaplanes, helicopters, and flying boats. This was a military operation of significant scope, happening just 1 year after World War II ended, at a time when military resources were supposedly focused on demobilization and peacekeeping operations around the world. Think about the context. The United States had just emerged victorious from the most devastating war in human history. The country was transitioning from a wartime to a peacetime economy. Millions of service members were being discharged and returning home. Resources were needed for reconstruction in Europe through the Marshall Plan, for establishing the United Nations, for managing the occupation of Japan and Germany. And yet the Navy decided this was the perfect time to send nearly 5,000 people and a massive fleet to Antarctica for what was officially described as routine training and research. It doesn't add up. The resource allocation alone suggests that something far more important than training exercises was at stake. The expedition was supposed to last 6 to 8 months, with plans to establish a permanent base and conduct extensive mapping and research throughout the Antarctic summer. It was terminated abruptly after just 8 weeks. The official explanation cited bad weather and equipment failures, but Antarctica's weather patterns were well known, and the expedition had been planned to coincide with the most favorable weather conditions. Moreover, the equipment failures were never detailed in any specific way. What failed? How? Why weren't there backup systems? The reports are vague and unsatisfying, the kind of explanations that are given when the truth can't be revealed. Crew members who spoke years later, after they had left the military and felt free to share their experiences, told different stories. They described encounters with objects moving at impossible speeds, disc-shaped craft that would emerge from the ocean and fly away faster than any known aircraft. They talked about entire areas that were declared off-limits with no explanation, regions where even high-ranking officers weren't permitted to go. Some described finding openings in the ice, vast caverns that led deep into the continent, showing signs of artificial construction. Others mentioned ruins, structures that predated any known civilization, buildings that shouldn't exist according to our understanding of history. Admiral Byrd himself gave a disturbing interview to a Chilean newspaper on March 5, 1947, just after returning from the expedition. In that interview, he stated that it was necessary for the United States to take defensive actions against enemy air fighters, which come from the polar regions. He went on to say that in case of a new war, the United States would be attacked by fighters that are able to fly from one pole to another. At incredible speeds, these statements are a matter of public record. They appeared in the Chilean newspaper El Mercurio and have been verified by multiple sources. But they've never been adequately explained by official channels. What did Byrd mean by enemy air fighters from the polar regions? World War II was over. Germany had been defeated, its leadership dead or captured, its military infrastructure destroyed. Japan had surrendered after the atomic bombings. What enemy was Byrd talking about? And what fighters could travel from pole to pole at incredible speeds in 1947 when the fastest jets could barely exceed 500 miles per hour and had limited range? The technology Byrd described didn't exist in any nation's arsenal, at least not in any nation we know about. Some researchers have suggested that remnants of Nazi forces had established a secret base in Antarctica, possibly using advanced technology they had developed during the war. This theory has some historical basis. Germany did conduct the Neuschwabenland expedition to Antarctica in 1938 and 39, claiming a large territory they called New Swabia. There are German documents that reference plans for Antarctic bases, and there were certainly Nazi officials and scientists who disappeared at the end of the war, their fates never conclusively determined. But the logistics of maintaining a secret base in Antarctica, especially for a defeated nation with its infrastructure destroyed and its territory occupied, seem nearly impossible. Yet something happened during Operation High Jump that fundamentally changed American military thinking about Antarctica. In the immediate years following the expedition, the United States conducted several more Antarctic expeditions, including Operation Windmill in 1947 and 1948, and Operation Deep Freeze, which began in 1955 and continues to this day. Other nations, particularly the Soviet Union, also rushed to establish presence on the continent. The race to Antarctica during the 1950s mirrors the later space race in its intensity and secrecy. Why? What was everyone looking for? What had Operation High Jump discovered that made Antarctica a priority for every major power? The Antarctic Treaty of 1959 provides some clues. The treaty, which was signed by 12 nations and has since been joined by 42 more, essentially freezes all territorial claims to Antarctica and dedicates the continent to peaceful scientific research. On the surface, it's a remarkable achievement in international cooperation. But when you read the treaty carefully, you notice interesting provisions. Article 7 allows for observers from any treaty nation to inspect any facility, station, or equipment in Antarctica at any time. This level of mutual oversight is unprecedented in international agreements. It suggests that the signatory nations wanted to ensure that no one country could keep secrets about what they were doing or finding in Antarctica. But there's another interpretation. If all the major nations had discovered something in Antarctica that they collectively decided needed to be kept from the public, the treaty would provide a perfect framework for doing so. The inspections would ensure that no nation broke ranks and revealed the truth. The dedication to scientific research would provide cover for ongoing investigations. And the prohibition on military activity except in support of scientific missions would prevent any nation from trying to seize control of whatever had been found. The treaty could be, in essence, a conspiracy in plain sight, an agreement among nations to jointly manage access to Antarctica and control what information reaches the public. Beneath the ice of Antarctica, buried under more than 2 miles of frozen water, lies Lake Vostok. It's one of the largest lakes on Earth, measuring roughly 160 miles long and 30 miles wide, about the size of Lake Ontario. The lake has been sealed off from the outside world for at least 15 million years, possibly as long as 25 million years. During that entire time, this massive body of water has existed in complete darkness, under tremendous pressure from the ice above, with water temperatures that remain just above freezing due to geothermal heat from below. It's one of the most extreme and isolated environments on the planet, a world that has evolved completely separately from the surface for longer than humans have existed. The existence of Lake Vostok was first suspected in the 1970s when airborne ice-penetrating radar detected a large flat area beneath the ice. But it wasn't until the 1990s that scientists confirmed it was a liquid water lake and began to understand its true size and significance. The lake is kept liquid by a combination of geothermal heat from the Earth's interior and the immense pressure of the ice sheet above it, which lowers the freezing point of water. The water is believed to be incredibly pure, having been filtered through miles of ice over millions of years. But the question that captivated scientists was whether anything could survive in such an environment. In 2012, after years of careful drilling to avoid contaminating the lake, Russian scientists at Vostok Station finally broke through the ice and reached the lake's surface. They extracted water samples, and what they found defied every expectation. The lake contained life. Not just simple bacteria clinging to existence, but thousands of different species of microorganisms, many of which were completely unknown to science. These organisms had been evolving in total isolation for millions of years, cut off from the rest of Earth's biosphere, creating an ecosystem that exists nowhere else on the planet. It was like discovering an alien world right here on Earth. But that's not the strangest part. When scientists analyzed the DNA of some of these microorganisms, they found genetic structures that don't fit neatly into the known tree of life. These organisms appear to have evolved along completely different pathways from surface life. Some have genes that don't match any sequence in existing databases. Others have metabolic processes that use chemical reactions unknown in surface organisms. The implications are staggering. If life in Lake Vostok evolved so differently in just 15 to 25 million years of isolation, what might it become given longer periods of time? What might exist in other subglacial lakes that have been isolated even longer? This discovery raised a terrifying question. If life this alien, this fundamentally different from everything we know, exists in Lake Vostok, what else might be hidden beneath the ice? There are over 400 known subglacial lakes in Antarctica, and we've barely begun to explore them. Each one could contain unique ecosystems, organisms that challenge our understanding of biology and evolution. Some of these lakes have been isolated for even longer than Lake Vostok. Some exist in even more extreme conditions with different chemical compositions, different temperatures, different pressures. Each one is effectively a separate evolutionary experiment, an isolated laboratory where life has been developing in its own unique direction for millions of years. But here's where it connects to our central mystery. Could ancient humans have known about these hidden lakes? Could they have discovered something in the waters beneath the ice that convinced them Antarctica was not a place for human settlement? It seems impossible at first. How could ancient peoples have accessed subglacial lakes buried under miles of ice? But Antarctica hasn't always had its current ice sheet. During warmer periods in Earth's history, the ice coverage was less extensive. There would have been areas where the ice was thinner or absent entirely, where volcanic activity or geothermal heat created natural skylights into the world beneath. Imagine ancient explorers, perhaps during one of the warmer interglacial periods, discovering such an opening. They lower themselves down into caverns beneath the ice, following underground rivers until they reach one of these vast subglacial lakes. In the darkness, lit only by their torches, they see movement in the water. They encounter organisms unlike anything in their experience, creatures that evolved in isolation, that perhaps have capabilities or characteristics that make them dangerous or simply too alien to comprehend. The experience would be traumatic, inexplicable in the context of their worldview. They would return to the surface and tell stories of monsters in the deep, of a land cursed by the gods, of places where the natural order doesn't apply. These stories would spread, would be embellished and mythologized, but at their core would be a genuine warning based on real experience. Don't go to the southern land. Don't venture beneath the ice. There are things there that humans are not meant to encounter. And because these warnings came from respected explorers, from shamans and leaders who had no reason to lie, they would be believed and passed down through generations. The specific details would be lost over time, transformed into supernatural explanations, but the core message would remain. Antarctica is forbidden. Antarctica is dangerous. Antarctica is not for us. There's another possibility that's even more disturbing. What if something in these subglacial environments is actively hostile to human presence? Modern science has discovered extremophiles, organisms that thrive in conditions that would kill most life forms. We found bacteria living in nuclear reactors, thriving on radiation that would be instantly lethal to humans. We've discovered organisms in deep ocean vents that metabolize sulfur and heavy metals. We've found fungi in Chernobyl that can break down radioactive materials and actually grow better in high radiation environments. Life is incredibly adaptable and can evolve capabilities that seem impossible. Antarctica's subglacial lakes have been isolated for millions of years longer than any deep ocean vent or radioactive environment. The organisms there have had time to evolve in ways we can't predict. What if some of them developed characteristics that make them dangerous to surface life? What if they produce toxins that are effective against organisms they've never encountered? What if they have some other property, perhaps related to the unique magnetic or geological conditions in Antarctica, that makes them incompatible with human life? It's not a pleasant thought, but it's one that scientists studying these environments have to consider. And here's the truly unsettling part. We've only sampled a tiny fraction of Lake Vostok's water. We've only studied a handful of the organisms living there. We haven't explored any of the other hundreds of subglacial lakes. We have no idea what else might exist beneath the ice. We're essentially blind, poking around in the dark, hoping we don't wake up something that should have stayed sleeping. And maybe, just maybe, ancient humans were smarter than we give them credit for. Maybe they discovered something beneath the ice, something that convinced them to leave and never come back, and maybe we're making a terrible mistake by ignoring their warnings. In 2012, images from Antarctica began circulating that showed what appeared to be pyramidal structures jutting out of the ice. The images came from satellite surveys and aerial photographs showing massive formations that looked remarkably similar to the pyramids of Egypt or the step pyramids of Mesoamerica. Skeptics immediately dismissed them as natural rock formations, examples of pareidolia where the human brain sees patterns and familiar shapes in random data. It's a fair criticism. Humans are hardwired to recognize faces and geometric patterns, which is why we see shapes in clouds or patterns in static noise. But then more images emerged from different angles, different sources, different locations, and the formation started looking less like accidents of erosion and more like something that demanded serious investigation. One formation, located near the Shackleton Mountain Range in the Transantarctic Mountains, shows four distinct sides that come to a point, with angles and proportions that are eerily similar to the Great Pyramid of Giza. The symmetry is too perfect to easily dismiss. Each face of the structure appears to have the same slope, suggesting that if it is a natural formation, the erosion process somehow worked identically on all four sides, which is geologically unlikely. Another structure in the Ellsworth Mountains region appears to have been partially excavated or exposed by wind and ice movement, revealing what some researchers claim are regular blocks, edges that are too straight, corners that are too precise to be natural. Mainstream science refuses to seriously investigate these structures. The official position is that they are simply mountains that happen to have pyramid-like shapes due to erosion and geological processes. Nunataks, peaks that protrude through the ice sheet, can indeed have sharp geometric shapes. Wind erosion can create flat faces and sharp edges. But some geologists who have studied the images privately, who can't speak publicly without risking their careers, admit the formations are unusual. The symmetry is too consistent. The proportions are too regular. At minimum, they warrant closer examination. But that examination isn't happening. The problem with investigating these structures is accessibility. They're located in some of the most remote and hostile regions of Antarctica, areas that require significant resources and government. Permission to access, and permission is rarely granted for expeditions focused on potential archaeological discoveries. The Antarctic Treaty strictly limits activities on the continent, and while it allows for scientific research, it also gives nations the power to deny access to specific areas for various reasons. Any expedition attempting to study these pyramid structures would face bureaucratic obstacles that make the research nearly impossible. Environmental concerns would be cited, logistical challenges would be emphasized, and eventually the permission would simply not come through. Which raises the question, is this by design? Are these structures being deliberately kept off limits? If they're natural formations, there should be no reason to prevent their study. Geologists study unusual rock formations all the time. It's a normal part of Earth science. But if they're artificial, if they represent evidence of a pre-Ice Age civilization or something even more exotic, then the implications would be world-changing. It would mean rewriting human history from the ground up. It would mean acknowledging that advanced civilizations existed far earlier than we currently believe, or that non-human intelligences have been present on Earth, or that our entire understanding of the past is fundamentally flawed. Any of these possibilities would cause massive disruption to established narratives. Archaeological and anthropological careers are built on specific timelines and theories about human development. If those theories are wrong, if there's evidence of advanced civilization in Antarctica from periods when humans were supposedly primitive hunter-gatherers, entire academic fields would need to be restructured. Religious institutions would face challenges to their creation narratives. Political power structures that rely on certain historical interpretations would be destabilized. The motivation to suppress such evidence, or at least to prevent its investigation, would be enormous. But let's assume for a moment that these structures are artificial. Let's imagine that they really are pyramids or some other kind of constructed buildings. Who built them? The conventional timeline of human civilization goes back only about 12,000 years, to the end of the last ice age, when agriculture developed and the first cities arose. Before that, Humans were organized in small tribal groups, living as hunter-gatherers with relatively simple technology. We have no evidence of any human culture capable of building large stone structures before about 10,000 years ago. Yet Antarctica has been covered in ice for millions of years. The current ice sheet began forming about 34 million years ago. So if there are artificial structures in Antarctica, they would have to have been built either by a human civilization that existed far earlier than we believe possible, or by something that wasn't human at all. The first possibility requires us to completely revise our understanding of human history. It means accepting that there was an advanced civilization capable of sophisticated architecture and engineering that existed perhaps tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of years ago, and that this civilization was somehow completely destroyed, leaving almost no trace except for these structures buried under Antarctic ice. It's not impossible. Cataclysmic events can destroy civilizations. The asteroid impact that killed the dinosaurs left very little evidence of the creatures that existed before it. A similar event affecting a human civilization could erase most traces of its existence. But it would require such a massive revision of everything we think we know that most scientists are unwilling to even consider it. The second possibility, that something non-human built these structures, is even more challenging to accept. It requires entertaining the idea that intelligent life, either from Earth or elsewhere, existed on this planet long before humans and left behind evidence of its presence. This moves us into territory that mainstream science considers pseudoscience or science fiction. But the universe is billions of years old. Earth itself is 4.5 billion years old. Complex life has existed on Earth for over 500 million years. Is it really so impossible that intelligence could have evolved earlier than we think, in forms we haven't recognized, and left behind structures that we've dismissed as natural formations because we can't fit them into our current models? The truth is, we don't know. We can't know without proper investigation, and that investigation is being prevented, whether deliberately or through simple bureaucratic inertia. The structures remain, visible in satellite imagery, documented in photographs, and completely unstudied by mainstream archaeology. They stand as silent questions, pyramids or mountains, artificial or natural, evidence of lost civilizations or tricks of erosion. And until someone is allowed to actually go there, to examine them up close, to take samples and conduct proper analysis, they'll remain one more mystery in a continent full of mysteries. Here's something that doesn't add up. Something that should make everyone question the simple explanation that Antarctica is empty because of the cold. Antarctica is cold, yes, but it's not uniformly cold. There are regions of Antarctica, particularly along the Antarctic Peninsula and certain coastal areas, where summer temperatures regularly rise above freezing. In some areas, temperatures can reach 50 degrees Fahrenheit or even higher during the summer months. These are conditions that humans have successfully lived in throughout history. The Vikings established permanent settlements in Greenland and Iceland under similar conditions, building communities that lasted for centuries. Indigenous peoples of Tierra del Fuego, at the southern tip of South America, lived in a climate nearly identical to parts of coastal Antarctica, thriving in an environment that European explorers found almost unbearable. So why is there no evidence of even temporary human settlements in Antarctica's more hospitable regions? Why didn't ancient peoples establish seasonal camps along the coast, taking advantage of the relatively mild summers to hunt seals and penguins, to fish in the rich Antarctic waters, to explore the inland areas? The resources were there. Seals and penguins are abundant, easy to hunt, and provide meat, fat for fuel, and skins for clothing and shelter. The waters around Antarctica are among the most biologically productive in the world, filled with fish and krill and other marine life. Fresh water is available from glacial melt. Everything needed for human survival is present. Archaeological evidence shows that humans reached Tasmania, which was once connected to Antarctica through a landmass that included Australia, over 40,000 years ago. From Tasmania, Antarctica would have been visible on the horizon during clear weather. The journey across would have been challenging, certainly, but not impossible. Ancient peoples regularly made sea crossings that were just as difficult. They reached Australia from Southeast Asia at least 65,000 years ago, crossing significant stretches of open ocean even when sea levels were lower. They settled the Pacific Islands, making voyages of hundreds or thousands of miles in outrigger canoes, navigating by stars and currents and the flight patterns of birds. These were people with sophisticated maritime technology and deep knowledge of the ocean. Yet they never settled Antarctica, not even the northern tip of the Antarctic Peninsula, which is closer to South America than many of the Pacific Islands are to each other. The distance from Cape Horn to the Antarctic Peninsula is about 600 miles. The distance from Tahiti to Hawaii, a journey ancient Polynesians made routinely, is about 2,700 miles. The Antarctic crossing would have been cold and dangerous, but not more so than many voyages that ancient peoples successfully completed. So why didn't they do it? Why is there no archaeological evidence of even failed attempts, shipwrecks, or abandoned camps, or any sign that humans tried to reach Antarctica before the modern era? During the medieval warm period from approximately 900 AD to 1300 AD, global temperatures rose significantly. Ice coverage in the Arctic decreased. The Vikings took advantage of warmer conditions to explore and settle Greenland and Newfoundland. Sea routes that had been blocked by ice became navigable. Agricultural practices spread to more northern latitudes. It was a period of expansion and exploration across the northern hemisphere. Antarctica, during this same period, would have experienced similar warming. Parts of the coast would have been more accessible than they had been in centuries. Summer temperatures in the Antarctic Peninsula region would have been relatively comfortable. And yet there's no evidence that anyone took advantage of these conditions to explore or settle the continent. This is the temperature paradox. Antarctica has been accessible and habitable, at least seasonally, for much of human history. The barriers to settlement weren't significantly greater than barriers humans overcame in many other regions. The resources available were sufficient to support human populations, and yet no one settled there. No one even tried, as far as we can tell from the archaeological record. This suggests that temperature and habitability weren't the deciding factors. Something else kept people away, something that transcended practical concerns about weather and resources and isolation, something that made Antarctica fundamentally different from every other cold, remote, resource-rich region that humans successfully colonized. What could create such a universal avoidance? What could make diverse cultures from different continents, cultures that had no contact with each other, independently decide not to explore or settle Antarctica? The only explanations that make sense are either instinctive, something in human biology that reacts negatively to conditions in Antarctica, or cultural, a taboo or prohibition that was so widely shared and so deeply ingrained that it affected all human societies regardless of their other beliefs and practices. And either explanation suggests that there's something about Antarctica that humans recognized as fundamentally wrong or dangerous, something that made us collectively decide this place is not for us. In 1997, the United States National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration recorded a sound in the waters around Antarctica that they called the bloop. The sound was detected by underwater microphones called hydrophones that are part of a network set up to monitor ocean sounds. These hydrophones are spread across vast distances, and the bloop was so loud that it was detected by sensors over 5,000 kilometers apart, which meant that whatever produced it was extremely loud and powerful. The acoustic signature didn't match any known source. It wasn't a whale. It wasn't any other known marine animal. It wasn't a geological event like an underwater volcano or earthquake, though those have distinctive sounds that scientists recognize. It wasn't any known man-made source like ships or submarines. The sound appeared to be organic in nature. It had characteristics consistent with sounds produced by living organisms, a rapid rise in frequency, and a certain pattern of harmonics that biological sound production typically creates. But it was far too loud to be produced by even the largest whale species. A blue whale, the largest animal ever known to exist on Earth, produces calls that can reach up to 188 decibels and can be heard across a dam. Hundreds of miles of ocean. The bloop was significantly louder and was detected across thousands of miles. If it was produced by a living creature, that creature would have to be massively larger than a blue whale, larger than any animal science has ever documented. NOAA officially stated in 2005 that they believe the bloop was most likely caused by an ice quake, a sound produced when large icebergs crack or when sections of ice shelves break off and crash into the ocean. Ice calving events can indeed produce very loud sounds, but this explanation has problems. The acoustic signature of the bloop doesn't perfectly match recorded ice calving sounds. Ice makes a sharper, more percussive noise, while the bloop had a smoother frequency sweep. And while ice calving can be loud, it's unusual for such sounds to be detected across such vast distances in the way the bloop was. Some scientists accept the ice calving explanation, but others remain uncertain. The bloop isn't the only unexplained sound recorded in Antarctic waters. There's the upsweep, a long train of narrow-band upsweeping sounds that has been detected since 1991 and continues to this day. It's been recorded seasonally, with peak activity in the Antarctic summer and spring. The source has never been identified. There's the whistle, a sound that rises in frequency over several minutes, recorded multiple times in the Southern Ocean. There's the train, which sounds remarkably like a train running on tracks, but occurs in the middle of the ocean, far from any land. There's slow down, a sound that starts at a high frequency and gradually decreases over 7 minutes, recorded in May 1997 near the bloop location. There's Julia, a sound lasting about 15 seconds that was loud enough to be heard across the entire equatorial Pacific autonomous hydrophone array. NOAA has attributed most of these sounds to various natural phenomena, primarily ice-related events. But the explanations don't always fit perfectly, and the sounds continue to puzzle researchers who study them. What's particularly interesting is the frequency of these sounds. They occur far more often in Antarctic waters than in any other region of the world's oceans. Either Antarctica has much more active ice dynamics than other polar regions, or something else is producing sounds that we're misinterpreting or failing to identify correctly. Could these sounds be related to why humans avoided Antarctica? Ancient sailors relied heavily on their knowledge of ocean sounds. They could identify different weather conditions, nearby land masses, and even underwater features by the sounds the ocean made. Sound travels well through water, and experienced mariners learn to interpret the symphony of clicks, groans, roars, and whistles that the ocean produces. If the waters around Antarctica produce sounds that were unnerving or seemed unnatural, ancient peoples might have interpreted this as a warning. They might have believed these were the voices of gods or spirits, marking Antarctica as sacred or forbidden territory. In many cultures, certain sounds are considered bad omens or signs of supernatural presence. Whistling winds, unexplained groans from the earth, strange cries in the night, all of these feature in folklore as warnings or evidence of spiritual activity. If ancient mariners approaching Antarctica heard sounds like the bloop, or the whistle, or the train, sounds that didn't match anything in their experience, sounds that seemed to come from impossibly large creatures or from sources they couldn't identify, they would have turned back. They would have told stories about the sounds they heard, stories that would become part of oral tradition. Don't sail too far south. That's where the monsters live. That's where the spirits dwell. Those who go there don't return. And if the sounds were produced by unknown organisms living in the deep waters or beneath the ice, organisms that were potentially dangerous, then the ancient mariners' caution would have been completely justified. We know that the deep ocean contains creatures we've never seen. We've barely explored the depths. New species are discovered regularly, and some of them are large and strange enough to challenge our assumptions about what's possible. The giant squid was considered a myth until one was finally photographed in 2004. The colossal squid, even larger, wasn't confirmed to exist until 2007. What else is down there? What lives in the deep waters around Antarctica, in the trenches and abyssal plains, in the dark, cold depths that we've never properly explored? The sounds continue. The hydrophones still record mysterious noises from Antarctic waters. Scientists still debate their sources. And somewhere in the cold Southern Ocean, something large enough and loud enough to be heard across thousands of miles of water exists, making Sounds that we can't explain, whether it's ice or something else, whether it's natural or something more disturbing. The ocean around Antarctica keeps its secrets, and maybe ancient peoples hearing those same sounds or similar ones were right to stay away. Before Operation High Jump, before the world paid much attention to Antarctica, there was another military expedition that deserves examination. In 1938 and 39, Nazi Germany launched the German Antarctic Expedition, also known as the Neuschwabenland Expedition, named after the ship that carried the expedition members. Officially, the mission was to scout locations for whaling stations and to claim territory for Germany as other nations were doing at the time. Several countries had already claimed sectors of Antarctica, and Germany wanted to establish its own presence on the continent. But the resources dedicated to this expedition, the timing, and what happened during the mission suggest a more significant purpose than simply finding places to hunt whales. The expedition was led by Captain Alfred Richer, an experienced polar explorer who had previously conducted research in the Arctic. The team included some of Germany's best scientists, geographers, and pilots, along with military personnel and support staff. The ship was equipped with two Dornier Wall flying boats, specially modified seaplanes capable of operating from the deck of a ship. These aircraft were fitted with special cameras for aerial photography and had extended range capabilities. The expedition departed Hamburg in December 1938 and reached Antarctica in mid-January 1939. Over the next few weeks, the aircraft flew dozens of missions over a sector of Antarctica that Germany named Neuschwabenland, or New Swabia. The Germans flew over approximately 475,000 square kilometers of Antarctica, an enormous area roughly the size of Germany itself. They took over 11,000 photographs, creating the most detailed photographic survey of any Antarctic region that existed at the time. They dropped thousands of metal markers with swastikas to claim the territory for Germany, marking it as sovereign German land. The expedition returned to Germany in April 1939, and the photographs and data they collected were analyzed by German scientists and military planners. Some of this information was published in scientific journals. Much of it was classified as military intelligence. But according to some accounts that emerged after World War II, the expedition found more than just ice and rock. Reports from crew members who spoke years later, often anonymously or on their deathbeds, described discovering ice-free areas with vegetation, regions where geothermal heat from volcanic activity had melted the ice and created habitable zones. They described finding warm water lakes, cave systems that led deep into the mountains, and areas where the ice was thin enough that aircraft could potentially land. Some claimed they found evidence of previous habitation, ruins that suggested some ancient culture had once lived in Antarctica, structures or artifacts that didn't fit with the conventional history of the continent. These accounts are dismissed by mainstream historians as conspiracy theories, fabrications, or misremembered stories embellished over time. There's no physical evidence to support them, no photographs from the expedition that show ruins or ice-free zones with vegetation, but the accounts persist, and they're corroborated by multiple independent sources who had no apparent reason to lie or fabricate stories. And there's one undeniable fact that gives these stories some credibility. After the war, both the United States and Soviet Union became intensely interested in what the Germans had found in Antarctica. Allied forces captured German facilities, documents, and personnel. They interrogated German officers about the Antarctic expedition. They studied the photographs and maps the expedition had created, and then they launched their own expeditions to the same areas. What makes this relevant is what happened after the war ended. When Germany surrendered in May 1945, not all German forces laid down their arms immediately. Some submarine crews were at sea and continued operating for weeks after the official surrender. At least two U-boats, U-530 and U-977, surrendered in Argentina in July and August 1945, months after the war ended. The crews claimed they had been on extended patrols and hadn't received word of the surrender, but some researchers have suggested they might have been making supply runs to Antarctica, delivering personnel and equipment to bases that had been established there during the war. There are German documents that reference construction plans for Antarctic facilities, supply schedules, and personnel. Assignments. Some of these documents were captured and declassified decades later. They show that Germany had serious plans for Antarctic bases, though whether those bases were actually built and occupied is unclear. The official position is that the plans were never implemented, that the war prevented Germany from establishing permanent Antarctic presence. But the documents exist, and they show that Germany had both the intention and the capability to establish hidden facilities in remote locations, facilities that could potentially continue operating even after the central government had been defeated. Whether remnants of Nazi forces actually survived in Antarctica, whether they had access to advanced technology that allowed them to evade Allied detection, these questions remain unresolved. But what's undeniable is that something about Antarctica, something the Germans discovered or suspected, made multiple nations intensely interested in exploring and securing the continent after World War II. The amount of resources dedicated to Antarctic expeditions in the late 1940s and 1950s, at a time when those resources were desperately needed elsewhere, suggests that something of significant strategic importance was at stake. And whatever it was important enough that nations agreed to create the Antarctic Treaty, establishing a framework of international cooperation and oversight that has lasted for over 60 years, ensuring that no single nation could control or monopolize whatever exists on the continent. In the McMurdo dry valleys of Antarctica, in one of the most inhospitable regions on Earth, there's a glacier that appears to bleed. Blood Falls is a rust-red waterfall that flows from the Taylor Glacier into Lake Bonny. When it was first discovered by the geologist Griffith Taylor in 1911, scientists thought the red color came from algae, some form of red algae that had adapted to the extreme cold. It seemed like a reasonable explanation at the time, as certain algae can survive in snow and ice, sometimes producing red or pink pigmentation. But as technology advanced and scientists were able to analyze the water more thoroughly, they discovered something far stranger and more significant than algae. The water comes from a subglacial lake, a body of water trapped beneath the glacier that has been sealed off from the outside world for approximately 2 million years. The lake was covered by ice when Antarctica's climate changed, when the continent transitioned from a relatively temperate environment to the frozen wasteland we know today. For 2 million years, this water has existed in complete darkness, under the immense pressure of the glacier above, cut off from fresh oxygen, from sunlight, from any input from the surface ecosystem. It's one of the most isolated environments on Earth, a time capsule from an ancient era. The water is incredibly salty, about 3 times saltier than seawater, with salt concentrations that would be toxic to most forms of life. It's also rich in iron, which is why it appears red when it comes into contact with oxygen. When the iron-rich water flows out of the glacier and is exposed to air, the iron oxidizes, creating the blood-red color that gives Blood Falls its name. But the remarkable discovery wasn't the iron content or the salt levels. It was what was living in that water. When scientists analyzed samples from Blood Falls, they found thriving communities of microorganisms, bacteria that had been surviving and reproducing in this sealed-off environment for 2 million years. These organisms live without sunlight, without oxygen in the conventional sense, and in temperatures well below freezing. They've adapted to metabolize sulfur and iron compounds in ways that are completely unique. They use chemical reactions that we've never observed in surface organisms, extracting energy from minerals in a process that's fundamentally different from photosynthesis or conventional respiration. They represent a form of life that evolved in total isolation, developing survival strategies that scientists are only beginning to understand. The Blood Falls ecosystem gives us a window into how life might exist on other planets, in environments we previously thought were incompatible with life. If microbes can survive and thrive under these extreme conditions, locked away in darkness and cold and crushing pressure for millions of years, then life might be possible in far more places than we've imagined. The subsurface oceans of Europa or Enceladus, moons of Jupiter and Saturn that have liquid water beneath ice shells, might harbor similar ecosystems. Mars, which has subsurface ice and possibly liquid water, might have pockets of life using similar metabolic strategies. Blood Falls shows us that life is far more adaptable and resilient than we thought, but it also raises disturbing questions about what else might be living in the sealed-off environments beneath Antarctica's ice. Blood Falls is just one small outlet, one tiny window into one subglacial lake. There are hundreds of other lakes beneath the ice, many of which have been isolated for even longer periods. Some of these lakes exist under miles of ice in conditions that are even more extreme, with different chemical compositions, different pressures, different temperatures. Each one is effectively a separate world, an isolated ecosystem where evolution has been proceeding independently for millions of years. What if some of these ecosystems produce not just microscopic organisms, but something larger, something more complex? Evolution doesn't stop at bacteria. Given enough time and the right conditions, simple organisms can develop into more complex life forms. On the surface, it took billions of years for single-celled organisms to evolve into multicellular life, but that process might proceed differently in isolated environments with unique, selective pressures. What if one of these subglacial lakes contains organisms that are not just adapted to the extreme conditions, but are genuinely dangerous, producing toxins or having capabilities that make them threats to surface life? Ancient humans, if they somehow encountered such organisms, would have had no framework for understanding what they were seeing. They wouldn't have known about bacteria or extremophiles or isolated ecosystems. They would have interpreted unusual life forms as monsters, as demons, as evidence that the place was cursed or evil. And they would have fled, carrying stories that would be passed down through generations, stories that would eventually become legends and myths, but would retain at their core a genuine warning based on real experience. Don't go to the frozen land. There are things there that should not exist. There are forms of life that don't follow the natural order. Blood Falls continues to flow, its red waters staining the white ice, a visible reminder that Antarctica holds secrets we're only beginning to uncover. The organisms living in that ancient water have survived longer than most species that have ever existed on Earth. They've outlasted countless extinctions, climate changes, geological upheavals. They're witnesses to a version of Antarctica that existed before the ice, before the cold, before the continent became the frozen mystery it is today. And they might not be alone. Somewhere beneath the miles of ice, in other sealed-off lakes and underground rivers and cave systems we haven't discovered, other forms of life might exist, forms that are even stranger, even more adapted to the alien conditions, even more isolated from the world we know. The Antarctic Treaty, signed in Washington on December 1, 1959, and entered into force on June 23, 1961, is one of the most successful international agreements in history. 54 nations are now parties to the treaty, representing about two-thirds of the world's population. The treaty designates Antarctica as a scientific preserve, establishes freedom of scientific investigation, and bans military activity on the continent. It's held up as a model of international cooperation, a rare example of nations setting aside territorial disputes and military interests to work together for the common good of science and environmental protection. On the surface, it's exactly what it appears to be, a genuine attempt to ensure that Antarctica remains a place of peace and research. But when you examine the treaty's structure more closely, when you look at the specific provisions and how they function in practice, some interesting patterns emerge. The treaty prohibits any new territorial claims, but doesn't require nations to give up existing claims. 7 nations had claimed sectors of Antarctica before the treaty, overlapping in some cases, and those claims were essentially frozen in place, neither recognized nor rejected. This created a legal limbo where nations could maintain their claims without enforcing them, a compromise that satisfied everyone, but didn't actually resolve the underlying disputes. It's an elegant solution to a political problem. But it also means that the nations with existing claims have special status and special interests in Antarctica. The treaty allows for scientific research, but gives nations broad authority to restrict access to specific areas. Article 7 establishes that each nation has the right to designate observers who have complete freedom of access to all areas of Antarctica, all stations, installations, equipment, ships, and aircraft. In theory, this creates transparency, ensuring that no nation can conduct secret activities without other nations knowing about it. But in practice, it also means that if all major nations agreed to keep something secret, the treaty provides a legal framework for doing exactly that. The observers from different nations would all see the same things, would all have access to the same information, and if they collectively decided that certain information shouldn't be public, there's no mechanism in the treaty to prevent that agreement. Most significantly, the treaty includes provisions that restrict commercial mineral resource activities. The Protocol on Environmental Protection to the Antarctic Treaty, adopted in 1991, designated Antarctica as a natural reserve devoted to peace and science and prohibited any activity relating to mineral resources except for scientific research. On the surface, this seems like straightforward environmental protection. Antarctica's ecosystem is fragile, and commercial mining could cause devastating damage. But it also means that if there are valuable mineral resources or anything else of commercial or strategic value in Antarctica, access to those resources is controlled by the treaty nations, not by market forces or individual prospecting. The treaty also established Antarctic specially protected areas, now numbering over 70, which are regions that have restricted access even for scientific research. These areas are ostensibly protected because of their unique ecological, scientific, historical, or aesthetic value. Some protect breeding grounds for seals or penguins. Some preserve pristine ice cores for climate research. Some protect historic sites like early explorer camps. All of this makes perfect sense from a conservation perspective. But who decides what areas are protected and why? What criteria are used, and what happens if an area is protected not because of its ecological value, but because it contains something that governments don't want publicly accessible? Some researchers have noted that several Antarctic specially protected areas correspond to locations where unusual phenomena have been reported, areas where magnetic anomalies have been detected, areas where expeditions reported finding unexpected geological formations, areas near where the pyramidal structures are visible in satellite imagery. It's possible this is coincidence. It's possible that these areas are legitimately protected for the stated scientific reasons. But it's also possible that the protected area designation is being used to prevent unauthorized access to sites that might contain evidence of something governments want to keep secret. The treaty includes provisions for regular inspections, information sharing, and consultative meetings where member nations discuss Antarctic issues. All of this creates the appearance of openness and cooperation. But the treaty also allows nations to classify certain findings as matters of national security. Information can be shared between governments without being released to the public. Research can be conducted that never appears in scientific journals. Facilities can be built and operated that the public never hears about. In effect, the Antarctic Treaty creates a system where international cooperation and secrecy can coexist, where all major nations can access the continent, can conduct research, can monitor each other's activities, but can also agree collectively about what information reaches the public and what doesn't. Is this actually happening? Are nations using the Antarctic Treaty to suppress information about discoveries in Antarctica? There's no definitive proof, but there are troubling patterns. Scientific research that's conducted in Antarctica sometimes takes years to be published, far longer than comparable research conducted elsewhere. Some expeditions return with findings that are never fully explained to the public, with official reports that are vague or heavily redacted. Requests for information under Freedom of Information laws are sometimes denied on grounds of national security, even when the information relates to supposedly civilian scientific research. And there have been cases where independent researchers or journalists trying to investigate specific Antarctic phenomena have been denied access, denied permission to travel to certain areas, or faced bureaucratic obstacles that effectively prevented their research. The Antarctic Treaty expires in 2041, though it can be extended indefinitely if member nations agree. As that date approaches, there's been increasing discussion about what happens next, whether the treaty will be renewed as is, modified, or allowed to lapse. Some nations are pushing for changes that would allow limited commercial activity. Others want stronger environmental protections. But beneath these public discussions, there may be other considerations. What happens to the secrets if the treaty ends? What happens if nations no longer have a framework for coordinating what information is released? What happens if Antarctica is opened up to unrestricted commercial development and independent researchers gain access to areas that have been off limits for decades? So we return to our central question, the mystery that started this entire investigation. Why is Antarctica the only continent with no native human history? We've explored so many possibilities, so many pieces of this enormous puzzle. The geomagnetic anomalies that could have created physical and psychological discomfort in early humans, making them feel instinctively that something was wrong with the place. The acoustic anomalies in the surrounding waters, strange sounds that ancient sailors might have interpreted as warnings from gods or evidence of monsters in the deep. The possibility of dangerous or alien organisms in the subglacial lakes and ecosystems, life forms that evolved in isolation and might be incompatible with human presence. The pyramid structures that suggest someone or something might have been in Antarctica before, might have built things there, and then left for reasons we don't understand. We've examined the modern military expeditions, particularly Operation High Jump, which found something disturbing enough that it remains partially classified 75 years later. We've looked at the German Neuschwabenland expedition and the questions about what the Nazis discovered and whether they established secret bases that other nations later sought to find or control. We've studied the Antarctic Treaty, an agreement that creates both cooperation and the possibility of coordinated secrecy, a framework that could keep discoveries hidden if all major nations agreed that was necessary. We've explored the temperature paradox, the fact that parts of Antarctica have been habitable for much of human history, but were never settled despite humans colonizing far more hostile environments elsewhere. But perhaps the most disturbing possibility is the simplest one, the explanation that requires no conspiracy theories or hidden technologies or lost civilizations. Perhaps humans have always known at some deep instinctive level that Antarctica is not meant for us. Perhaps there's something about this continent, something in its fundamental nature, that conflicts with human consciousness in ways we can't fully articulate or understand. Every culture on Earth has places that are considered sacred or forbidden, places where humans are not supposed to go. Mountains that should not be climbed, caves that should not be entered, waters that should not be crossed. These taboos often can't be fully explained by practical concerns. They're deeper than that, rooted in something ancient and instinctive. What if Antarctica is Earth's ultimate forbidden zone, a place that triggers something in human psychology that says, this land is other, this land is wrong, this land is not for us? What if evolution programmed into us at a level deeper than conscious thought, a wariness of conditions or environments or phenomena that exist uniquely in Antarctica? What if early humans who ventured too far south, who got close enough to Antarctica to sense these conditions, felt such profound unease that they turned back and never tried again, and passed down their caution through stories and cultural prohibitions that eventually became universal? Modern humans, disconnected from the instincts and sensitivities that guided our ancestors, have finally established a presence on Antarctica. We have research stations scattered across the continent, thousands of scientists and support staff who spend months or even years there. We've convinced ourselves that we've conquered the last continent, that we've finally brought Antarctica into the human sphere. But have we really? Even now, no one lives there permanently. No one is born there. No one builds homes with the intention of staying forever. Everyone who goes to Antarctica knows they're temporary visitors, knows they'll eventually leave and return to the normal world. The continent has never been colonized, never been developed, never been integrated into human civilization the way every other landmass has been. We maintain research stations like outposts on an alien world, clusters of heated buildings connected by ropes and flags, so people don't get lost in the whiteouts, places where humans can survive but never quite feel at home. The psychological effects of extended Antarctic stays are well documented. People experience cabin fever, depression, sensory deprivation, sleep disturbances, vivid dreams, and a profound sense of isolation that goes beyond the physical remoteness. Some describe feeling watched, feeling that something vast and incomprehensible exists beneath the ice. sensing a presence that they can't explain rationally but can't shake emotionally. Scientists who work in Antarctica, especially those who study the subglacial lakes or who venture into the most remote regions, sometimes speak in carefully guarded terms about experiences they can't quite explain. Equipment malfunctions in ways that engineers can't account for. Instruments give readings that don't make sense and can't be replicated. Time seems to behave strangely in certain locations, with people losing track of hours or experiencing temporal distortions. The ice makes sounds that are too organized, too pattern-like to be random cracking and settling, sounds that almost seem like language or music or some form of communication. Compasses behave erratically. GPS systems lose signal. People report seeing things in the ice, shapes or structures or movements that disappear when examined directly. These reports never make it into official publications. They're dismissed as hallucinations brought on by isolation and sensory deprivation, as tricks of light in the endless white landscape, as the mind's attempt to find patterns and meaning in random phenomena. And maybe that's all they are. Maybe Antarctica drives people slightly mad in ways that are predictable and explainable through psychology and neuroscience. But maybe, just maybe, these experiences are glimpses of something real, something about Antarctica that our conscious minds can't process, but that our subconscious minds recognize as deeply wrong. The truth is, we may never know the complete answer to why Antarctica has no native human history. The real explanation might be a combination of many factors. The harsh environment certainly played a role, even if it wasn't the only factor. The isolation and distance from other populated landmasses made the journey difficult. The lack of trees meant no wood for fire or shelter, making survival more challenging than in other cold regions. The powerful storms and unpredictable weather created genuine hazards for ancient seafarers. All of these practical concerns would have contributed to the difficulty of reaching and settling Antarctica. But underneath these practical factors, there might be something deeper, something that made the practical difficulties feel insurmountable, that turned challenges that humans have overcome elsewhere into barriers that felt absolute and unconquerable. Whether it's geomagnetic anomalies affecting human neurology, acoustic phenomena creating subconscious unease, the presence of genuinely dangerous organisms in the subglacial ecosystems, evidence of previous civilizations that failed and left warnings, or simply something about Antarctica's nature that human consciousness finds fundamentally incompatible, the result is the same. Throughout all of human history, across all cultures and time periods, humanity has collectively avoided settling on this continent. Even when the climate was suitable, even when we had the technology to survive there, even when we had explored and settled every other corner of the Earth, Antarctica remained empty. That's not coincidence. That's not accident. That's a pattern so profound and so consistent that it demands explanation. And perhaps the most unsettling thought is this: what if we're still avoiding it? What if our modern presence in Antarctica, with all our research stations and scientific missions, is still just us standing at the edge, never quite willing to commit fully to making it our home? What if, despite all our technology and rational thinking, we still feel that ancient instinct telling us to stay away, but we've learned to ignore it just enough to visit, but never enough to truly settle? The continent remains, silent and vast beneath its miles of ice, keeping its secrets. In the depths beneath that ice, in the sealed-off lakes that have been isolated for millions of years, in the geological formations that might or might not be artificial, in the magnetic anomalies and acoustic mysteries and the strange experiences of those who spend time there, Antarctica holds answers. Answers to questions about our past, about the history of human civilization, about what else might exist or have existed on this planet. Answers about the limits of human habitation and the boundaries of where our species belongs. Answers about whether we're alone on our own planet, whether other intelligences have left traces we've been too blind or too frightened to recognize. And somewhere in that frozen silence, in the geometry of those pyramid structures, or in the genetic code of organisms that evolved in total isolation, or in the classified reports from military expeditions that remain sealed decades later, The answer to why Antarctica has no native history waits to be discovered. The question is, are we ready for that answer? Or is there a reason, buried deep in human consciousness, encoded in our instincts, and passed down through countless generations of stories and taboos, that we've always known not to ask too loudly, not to look too closely, not to push too hard to uncover what Antarctica is hiding? Because maybe, just maybe, our ancestors knew something we've forgotten. Maybe they understood that some places are empty for a reason. Maybe they recognize that some secrets are meant to stay buried beneath the ice. Maybe they knew that Antarctica's silence isn't an invitation to fill it with human voices, but a warning to respect the boundary between our world and something else, something ancient and powerful and fundamentally other that has claimed the last continent as its own. And maybe in our arrogance and our faith in technology and science, we're making a terrible mistake by refusing to heed that warning. By insisting on pushing deeper into the ice, on drilling into sealed lakes, on exploring caves that have been dark for millions of years, on disturbing what should have stayed sleeping. The ice is melting. Climate change is revealing parts of Antarctica that have been hidden for thousands or millions of years. New discoveries are being made every year, new organisms found, new geological features exposed, new mysteries uncovered. And with each discovery, we edge closer to whatever it is that has always kept Antarctica separate from the rest of human civilization. Whatever we find might change everything. It might rewrite history. It might challenge our understanding of life and intelligence and our place in the universe. Or it might simply confirm what ancient peoples somehow always knew, that Antarctica is the one place on Earth where humans should not settle, the one continent that does not belong to us, the last empty land that is meant to stay empty.